You can't be in community and see so much suffering without asking, how do we change the system, right? So Stone Soup was a wonderful way of making sure needs were met. But we began asking, why are there so many needs, right? Why this great injustice? And how do we make sure that people can buy their own groceries and keep a roof over their heads?
Welcome to Activists Make History. My name is Peggy Nash. I've been a union activist, a feminist advocate, and for nearly a decade, a member of Parliament in Canada's House of Commons. I know what it's like to start from scratch, against the odds, in building a community campaign or running for political office. Our lives are hugely affected by political decisions, but for the underrepresented in political life, Canadian politics can seem like a secret society designed to shut them out. I'm here with a special series from Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, to lift the curtain on these electoral mysteries and show the underdogs how we can do it. In Activists Make History, I talk to activists, experts, political leaders, and those like me who've been there and done that, to show you can make real progressive change in how Canadian democracy functions so that we can win a better world through elected office. This episode was also made possible with the generous support of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. My guest today is Alexa Gilmour, a dedicated community leader, United Church minister, and founder of the Stone Soup Network. Her work focuses on supporting those facing rising costs and systemic challenges. Growing up and raising a family in Parkdale High Park, Alexa's deep roots in the community fuel her commitment to advocacy and social justice. Join us as we explore her journey and learn more about her vision for a more equitable future. Now, full disclosure, I also come from Parkdale High Park, and I met Alexa when I was elected here as the MP a number of years ago. And my first experience with Alexa was her work with refugees. It was a time under the Stephen Harper Conservative government when refugees were coming from Eastern Europe, Roma refugees. They were facing discrimination, sometimes violence there. And many of them came to our neighborhood in Parkdale. Now, unfortunately, there were scrupulous legal aid lawyers who took their legal aid money and then didn't defend them, didn't even show up for their case. So many of them were deported. There was one family, the Pazuma family, that had faced violence. They were desperate, a couple with a small child. And Alexa, in her leadership role as the minister at Windermere United Church, sheltered the family in her church, not just for a few days or weeks, but for nearly 3 years. And ultimately, with a much better lawyer, Alexa's advocacy and work in Parliament, the Pazuma family left Canada briefly, but was assured on their return that they would get to stay here. And that is what happened. And they are living in Canada and healthy and well today. So Alexa, thank you for your leadership and welcome to Activists Make History.
Thank you, Peggy. It's really lovely to be here. I loved that introduction, and I just want to make sure that I don't take credit for all 3 years. The first 3 years were at the St. John's, how a priest sheltered them for a year and a half. And when they could no longer, our church brought them in. They actually lived in my office, the three of them, for a year and a half, and I moved into the toddler room down the hall.
It's still so impressive because I remember how tough the Conservative government was on Roma refugees. It was a very, very sad time for so many families, and your leadership stood out. Now, you grew up in the Parkdale High Park area. Can you tell us a bit about your background and how that may have shaped your approach to your advocacy today?
Yeah, I think I need to go back a few years, because while my family goes back 5 generations in Parkdale High Park, I actually spent my formative years in India, in a rural village with no running water, no electricity, no schools. My parents were volunteers, and they worked with the local community to build wells, schools, electricity. So when I came back to Parkdale High Park at the age of 7, I had this real deep lived experience of the injustices in the world, right? Of the ways in which some people grew up with so much and some people grew up with so little. And so I was a 7-year-old kid standing on the front lawn of my house selling handmade puppets for a club that I had made up. We only had one other member, my younger sister, and it was called Money for the World, because we wanted to see our beloved friends that we had been raised with have all of the things that we were seeing our Parkdale High Park folks living with. So that really shaped who I am and led me towards ministry. Parkdale High Park was also a place where community surrounded you. I could ride my bike and my parents never worried that I was in danger. I was in the community that cared for me and looked out for me. And we would go up to the local corner store as really young children, and the wonderful couple there would welcome us and know us by name. And so it was a very special experience of growing up almost in another type of village. And I felt really blessed to be able to come back and serve as the minister at Windermere United Church, having grown up on that street. Windermere United Church itself was this incredible place that had decided that putting their faith into practice was the most important thing, not filling the pews, not fundraising for new doors or whatever was going on. And so the very first thing that happened was the Pasumas came and lived, and we were facing the Harper government with all that that meant. There was a threat of, this could be considered aiding and abetting and instead of properly understood as sanctuary. So maybe 2 years in jail, $50,000 fines for me and my counsel. And yet these faithful people said, but if we do not do it, they will die. And how can you send, a 5-year-old and her parents back to a country where they may die? So it was very faithful. I learned a lot about never underestimate and never assume that your community will or won't do something. So ask, right? When Mary Jo Letty, who's the founder of Romero House, called me, and I said, of course, I'll bring the council together. We'll have an emergency meeting. She said, thank you, Alexa. I've called 20 churches, and they all said, we're too busy with Christmas. It was the week before Christmas. And I think in that moment, I realized that sometimes our leadership assumes it's too big a burden. And I had learned through my folks to ask and to discern in community. And that's really been how my work has been ever since. The coalition building, the movement making, the doing it together, not assuming that I have all the answers.
That's such an interesting view and a wonderful, wonderful story and example. I find often that people, they may have progressive values. They may want to help, but they often don't know how. And so offering people an opportunity to act on their values, to be involved and to form that community, in my view, it's an incredible gift that you've given people, and it shapes them. Like those families, not just the Pazuma family, but the families of your congregation will remember that, and it shapes them.
And it shaped the whole neighborhood, because out of that one instance, Stone Soup Network was born. And so when the Pasumas lived in our church, they literally could not leave without fear of being deported, the police picking them up and escorting them to the airport. So that meant we have to bring everything, dentists, haircuts, play dates, into the building. And at first I was really anxious about going out and asking for things, right? I'd feel a little uncomfortable. But to a person that I asked, and the best example I have of this is the hairdresser, I said to her, they can't pay. They can't even come to you. You'd have to bring all your stuff. You can't even tell anybody that they're here because it's very secretive right now. And she said, you're never going to believe this, but just last night I was sitting on my sofa with my boyfriend saying, I really want to do some good in the world, but all I know how to do is cut hair. And it was this recognition for me that when we ask people to do what is uniquely theirs to do, that they feel their own lives are weighty and meaningful. And so this piece of we each have a role to play, and Stone Soup invites people to give from their abundance and share it with a neighbor that might be in need. The other side of Stone Soup was actually not the Pasumas, but a family that regularly came for help, for benevolent help. We had grocery gift cards that we would give out regularly. And this man was another refugee, had traveled through great adversity and trauma. He had 3 children, 2 with special needs. He himself had had a heart attack, so they were on ODSP because he couldn't work. And he was always stoic. His wife had breast cancer the year before, and he would always say, you know what, with your help, with God's help, I will be fine. But this one day he was weeping in my office, just weeping. And after 5 years of knowing him, I thought, what more could have happened? What terrible thing has happened? Because he's never cried before. And he said, It's my wife's birthday on Wednesday, and she really wants me to take her to Swiss Chalet, but I can't even afford groceries. What kind of a man am I?
Mm.
And it was this moment that it takes more than grocery cards, which were what we were giving out, to feed the soul. You have to feel like you belong in a community, that you can celebrate an anniversary, that you can walk up onto Bloor Street and be part of this community. And so Stone Soup was that place. It started with him. We got a restaurant who donated a meal for 5. And we got, then after that, a daycare donated a spot for 1 child. And the first woman was a single mom who, while her kid went to daycare, she went back to school. There was dance school spots and clothing stores and grocery stores and you name it. 30 businesses, 8 social agencies all participated. In the end, we had over $250,000 made available to neighbors in need just by asking, just by inviting people to share from their abundance. Really quite a remarkable learning for me. As you said, that people want to give and they don't know how. And when you invite them and create these avenues, miracles happen, right?
It's sometimes people will give money. They want to do something, they give money. To me, this is much more meaningful. It's almost like an old-fashioned barter system where people share what they can and they receive what they need. And yeah, it's an interesting opportunity for people to make a difference. And I want to ask you about making the leap from that kind of activism, because clearly you're passionate about social justice, about helping people, about making sure people in need get access to better opportunities. Why the move to politics? Because you are also offering people an opportunity to make a difference in a different way by electing you or being part of a team. Why did you decide to move into the electoral realm, and how does that relate to your history of activism?
You can't be in community and see so much suffering without asking, how do we change the system? Right? So Stone Soup was a wonderful way of making sure needs were met. But we began asking, why are there so many needs, right? Why this great injustice? And how do we make sure that people can buy their own groceries and keep a roof over their heads? And, you discover that ODSP rates and OW rates are simply, untenable. You can't even get a basement apartment for the amount that we get on OW now. And so we began organizing around advocacy. We ended up in offices like yours and offices at the other levels of government trying to advocate for change, whether that was universal basic income or climate change or getting more shelters. And I began actually, because of the Basuma thing, we had an interfaith experience where our Jewish and Muslim neighbors came alongside us. We began advocating as an interfaith coalition on these issues. And so I saw the ways in which elected officials had a role to play and the ways in which the ones I admired most worked with the activists to create the change. So they were on the inside writing these bills and making these motions, but the people power is what they need to be able to make that happen. And so that pathway became quite a natural pathway for me to move from, wanting to change the system to feeling like I needed to put my name forward and run.
Now, for many people, probably most people, political parties and getting involved in elections is a bit of a mystery. You're not what I would call a backroom person that's election hardened. How did you navigate your way to figure out the steps you needed to take and how this would all sort itself out? Did you consult widely, or how did you figure it all out?
Yeah, I'm going through all of this for the first time. It's not like I was an EA of a former elected official or any of those things. So it's quite an experience to trust and be carried by the riding association, by the team. And my own way into the world is I want to be useful. And so there's a personal discernment that happens where I think, okay, here's my gifts, here's my network, here's what I've got. But it has to be tested, I think, in community. So yeah, I did seek out the wisdom of others, have conversations with people that I admired. And to be fully honest about it, people that I admire that were elected officials were saying things to me like, you should think about this. And when you get someone saying that to you enough times, you eventually start to think about this. But I do think our best decisions are tested in community. And when you have the affirmation of your community, then you can really trust that you will be able to make a difference because you're not going to be alone. I'm always telling my kids, smart people ask for help. And, you surround yourself with a team that's going to make a difference.
Alexa, I have seen pictures at events, and you frequently are standing beside NDP leader Marit Stiles. I assume you have gotten to know her well. What's your take on how she's handling the campaign? Because she is, of course, a first-time leader going through an election. So what's your takeaway?
I'm glad you asked that. She is quite an inspiring leader. I'm really excited to work with her. And it's fascinating to me that we're in a time where we're talking about Trump and tariffs. And here we have an experienced leader who, worked in the field of negotiating with big American companies and got good deals for Canadian workers. She's also personable. She's been there to support new team members like me, which is what you want in a team leader. And just the other day, she came into our riding, and together we were standing at Park, which is a fabulous example of the ways that we can get affordable housing done now, right? By acquiring, they've got 8 properties with 151 residents being cared for. They were one of the founding members of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. So we're getting a lot of innovation out of the Ontario NDP under Marit Stiles. And I think we'll see some really, really great things for our province under her leadership.
You make a really interesting point, because my experience in politics is that it is about a team, and it may be Alexa Gilmour's face on the posters and on the leaflets and on the website and social media, but there is a whole team. And certainly for me, when I first got involved, I had this hazy idea that there was a team, but I didn't really know how it all worked. A couple of questions on that. You obviously have leadership skills. You were a leader in the community. That gave you confidence. It gave you skills in terms of public speaking, networks of people you could draw on. But how have you found the transition? Because while you were a public figure before this election, I found it to be a big transition. Suddenly it is your face on posters when you walk down the street. And kids say to their parents, "Hey, mommy, is that the lady on that sign?" Yeah. Have you had any interesting experiences, or how do you feel about that?
You're right. It is a very strange experience, a bit on the surreal side, in that you see your face, but you know that you represent a team. So when I see those signs go up, I think, wow, look at our team go. But when I'm standing in front of a school handing out the materials, they're saying, "I voted for you," or, "Oh my gosh, in the flesh," somebody said to me the other day. And, so there's a piece of a sacrifice for me. I'm not someone who sought that part out. And I'm aware that, the next time I'm trying to have a family meal at a restaurant, that someone may come over and really need something from me, and that my family's going to pay a cost for that. It's a poignant piece that, we give up something for our values and for our greater good. And one of the things I'm giving up is my privacy on that piece as the face of this team.
Yeah, I found that to be a transition. I won't say it was difficult, but it was a transition. And you mentioned your family, and it does put them also under the spotlight now. You have, I think, 5 kids.
Yeah.
How do your kids react? What are their ages, and how do they feel about mom's face on all these signs?
I think the overwhelming feeling is that they're proud of me. I don't think they fully understand the extent of what this all means and the changes in my schedule and their anonymity. Although we're very, very clear that this is my job. It's not theirs. And so to whatever extent they want to participate, if they want to come out or not come out, if they want to be, there on election night or not, we have a special situation in that 4 of my children came to us through the Children's Aid and have their own variations of special needs. And so we're going to have to be very careful that they have their needs looked after and that they have permission to be their full selves in every situation. But for the most part, they want to see the world better. They want to see the world better, having been through many of the social services themselves and have talked publicly about living in a shelter system or going through social services at school. They want it to be better, and they want me to do what I can to make it better. Although I will tell you that my 10-year-old said, he woke up one morning and he said, I dreamt that we were living in a White House. Do we get the White House?
That's great.
No,
So what's the age spread of your kids?
Well, the youngest just turned 5 and the oldest is 28. So and all together, between me and my kids, we have been to 8 schools in our riding in Parkdale High Park. So I have a deep understanding of the ways in which the school system is doing well and the places where it's lacking, and the disparity between schools right in our own riding, from this firsthand experience of being a parent and someone who grew up here.
And I assume that educational changes, funding, more investment in our schools and in teaching staff is a priority for you. If you have kids in the school system, you see it close up and firsthand.
Yeah, and because I have neighbors. I have a neighbor who's on stress leave from school. 2 of the teachers in my kids' classes last year were on stress leave. So it's untenable. We can't keep going this way. We have to invest in our schools, in our teachers, and our kids. So it is a priority area. But, all the areas have intersectional priorities, right? Our healthcare is part of that. Teachers and kids receiving the access to it, and housing, and all of those things. I'm really keen to see us thrive. And there's multiple issues that I want to work on. And I want to keep that at the forefront, that we can't focus in on one piece, or we neglect the ways in which our beings need a holistic solution.
And as you go around the community, what are the key issues in addition to education? What else are you hearing at the doorstep that are top priorities for people?
Peggy, I was at this doorstep last week in this bachelor apartment full of boxes, moving boxes, and the woman said to me, they raised my rent here on January 1st to $2,000 a month on a bachelor apartment. I grew up here. I never thought I'd be pushed out of my community. And she was moving to the outskirts of town. It's devastating for people across the riding. The affordability crisis is real. Housing, of course, is a major factor. And that's part of why I'm running, and part of why I'm running under the NDP banner, because we need to get back in the business of building housing. We used to do that 30 years ago, and we haven't since, and we can't leave it to the market. The other parties seem to want to do that. And I think with 81,000 people in Ontario who are homeless now, and a 12% increase per year expected, that's 250,000 people who will be homeless by 2035 if we don't build housing, and deeply affordable housing, and variety of housing, right? Like densification and everything.
Alexa, when I was a young mom, I was a single parent, and I was working full time, but a city childcare subsidy and co-op housing saved my life. They really did. I will never forget the feeling of incredible relief when I was able to move into a unit at Rose Co-op on Davenport. And they were so kind. They sanded the floors and painted the walls. And I have that feeling that it saved my life. But I remember when the federal government, I think it was under Jean Chrétien, they canceled the National Housing Program. And that cut the money to co-op and subsidized housing. And I think, what a calamity. How could we not predict the terrible crisis that we have today when we're not building enough deeply affordable homes? If you just give money to people to pay more to developers and private builders, they'll just jack up prices, which is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and then you add to that the Ford government's decision to take meaningful rent control off of all of the new builds. And we're seeing in every one of the apartment buildings that we're going to, that people are afraid that any day now their rent will go to a place where they can no longer afford it, or that they must remain exactly where they are, because if they tried to leave and rent anything else, the price will jump so high that they feel stuck. So, meaningful rent control is another piece that we have to be working on for our folks, because it's very painful right now, very frightening for a lot of us.
Yeah, a lot of suffering right now.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know you are on the campaign trail, and every door you're not knocking on means voters that you're not meeting. But I just want to ask you how you're feeling and what do you think's going to happen?
I'm feeling grateful for this opportunity. I think I was standing in the campaign office and someone walked in and she said, "Alexa, you probably talked to hundreds of people last week, so you probably don't even remember our conversation, but you came to my door and I was so despondent over the state of things globally with Trump in the US, with potential of, a polyethnic government here, and I was feeling just completely despairing. And by the end of our conversation, I knew what the antidote to the despair was. And she said, "So I'm here to volunteer." And so my experience of the last few weeks has been one of hope. Like, win or lose, people are out, people are making a difference. And it is people who will make the difference. Deep pockets are one thing, but history's always shown that when people rise up and work together, that the change happens, and the change for the better, for the common good. So I am quite buoyed up by this last few weeks. I'm hopeful that the next week will also be that experience. I'm feeling grateful that in Parkdale High Park, you can vote your heart and your conscience and not worry about the strategic vote. We have strong roots here, and we've been NDP for almost 2 decades, and I'm out and the team is out. So I'm excited and feel, there's a lot of humility around it, but a lot of excitement for what will come and a huge amount of gratitude.
Well, I know you've been working so hard, and you're absolutely right. Win or lose, when you build that team, especially the team of volunteers, and people get involved and they get a chance to make a difference, it brings people together, and there's a kind of jubilance that comes with that. And but it takes a leader to step up and make that difference and offer people that opportunity. 2 more quick questions.
Yeah,
One piece of advice you would give to someone listening to this podcast who might be thinking, well, first of all, might be thinking, I would be interested in running for election one day. What is your advice?
I think my advice is to get involved, stuff some envelopes, knock on some doors, meet some people, because you'll figure out where you belong in that process. There's absolutely a role for you. And whether it is running or whether it's the person behind or the campaign manager. So just get involved, do that deep discernment around why you're running and who you're running for, right? I think that's key. And check with your community, right? Let your community be part of your discernment in that would be the first thing I would say to anyone wanting to run. And, all the campaigns across the province are looking for people right now. So get involved. It is the antidote to despair, and you are needed. Your gifts, whatever they are, they will find a place.
Good advice. And my second quick question, if someone does want to get involved in your campaign specifically, how would they do that?
Okay, well, they can reach out to us at our campaign office. Probably the best way is Alexa Gilmour.OntarioNDP.ca, or just Google my name and NDP, you'll find it. We're in the Parkdale area at Queen and Roncy. You can walk in the office there, and you can find us on Instagram and X at Alexa N, the initial N, Alexa N Gilmour. Would love to hear from folks.
We really appreciate the time you have taken out of your campaign. I'm sure you're going to go running out of wherever you are now back to meet voters. We really appreciate it. Alexa Gilmour, thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership, and best of luck on Election Day.
I really appreciate this opportunity to talk, Peggy. It has been great. Thank you.
That was Alexa Gilmour, founder of the Stone Soup Network and Ontario NDP candidate for Parkdale High Park. We thank her for taking time away from her busy campaign so close to the Ontario election.
Activists Make History is a special podcast series from Perspectives, a Canadian journal of political economy and social democracy, a publication and production of the Broadbent Institute. This show could not have been made possible without the generous contribution of Unifor, Canada's largest private sector union. If you'd like to hear more from Activists Make History, share and subscribe to Perspectives Journal on all major podcast platforms, as well as Press Progress's Sources podcast that digs deeper into the news stories you won't find in the major papers. The Perspectives Journal podcast and Sources are proud members of the Harbinger Media Network, Canada's progressive podcast community. Once again, I'm Peggy Nash, your host for Activists Make History and proud member of the Broadbent Institute's Board of Directors. You can read my latest book, Women Winning Office, An Activist Guide to Getting Elected, from Between the Lines Books.